shifting associations, and a new plane of existence on this week's episode of the IndieBar Report podcast. Hey, right back in episode number 386 of the IndieBar Report podcast. It is another solo pod. First time in a while for these, but you know, every once in a while we return to them and we see what happens and how everything kind of sorts itself out. Yeah, no Ryan this week. Don't really know where he is. So, you know what that means. We'll be rocking with one voice this week, and we got some news to go through, so it'll be kind of a fun little week here. We'll talk a little bit of Paul, and we'll see where things wind up leading to, and odds are it will be a relatively quick week, even though we do have a good amount to cover. So with that, we will just jump right in, get started, and see where the week winds up taking us. But it will start us off in the American Association because we have some team movement news. It was last Saturday that it came out that they were going to have an announcement about the 13th team of the American Association, i.e. an expansion team. That was going to be announced some point over the next week or two. I believe the 13th was the exact date. But regardless, we were all beginning to try to find where that team was going to be located. Obviously, we know in the past there was talk with Murfreesboro. There's been a lot of discussion about perhaps a return to Fort Worth if there was a ballpark there, or at least someone in the greater Cleburne area, just to simply aid in the travel going down to really a team that is largely isolated in that league, being the only indie ball team in the state of Texas, and their closest travel companion being Kansas City, which is still a multi-hour, I think 6 or 7 hour drive away, which does make things more difficult for scheduling. If you could put a travel partner in there, it would make it a little bit easier. But it winds up being the other long-rumored location in Blaine, Minnesota, a Minneapolis suburb, which will now mark a return to the land of 10,000 lakes for the American Association, the first Minnesota team since the St. Paul Saints, a founding member, left back post-pandemic when there was realignment in MILB. It isn't formally announced yet to be Blaine. That should be made clear. That will come over the next week or so. However, when you dig through the town meeting notes and the planning board notes, as well as other articles surrounding the plan development in Blaine, I believe it's called the 101st Avenue Redevelopment Plan, you will note that the current public plan has a ballpark anchor. Also, in the planning notes, there is an approval structure for not just a ballpark, but also a parking area as well. There's reports that the first anchor store in a large Shields, which for East Coasters such as myself, you may not be familiar with Shields, but think kind of like a Cabela's or Bass Pro type store. It's generally a more, I guess, rural large box retailer from my understanding of it. A Myers maybe also a decent comp, although that's a bit more Midwest than I'm used to. But regardless, it's a big retail store. That's the important thing here. And that's supposed to open in 2028. So it seems to be generally agreed upon that the team is going to be going to Blaine. We know the American Association has wanted to get back into Minnesota. We know they have had interest in Blaine in the past. They'll have a ballpark. This whole redevelopment area is also very reminiscent of the ballpark commons up in Franklin, Wisconsin, where the Milkmen play. It's a very similar setup to being a whole mixed-use retail, residential, commercial venture. It seems to be what they like to go towards. We know in the past, Josh Schaub, who just got a 3-year extension, has mentioned that these are kind of the things they like to look for, and they like to have a whole entertainment districts to really build around, and that seems to be holding true here. And it'll be very interesting to see how this winds up working out. Obviously, they're going to be in the same division as Fargo is, as Sioux Falls is. They will be with Winnipeg, presumably. So there will be some realignment that will have to occur here. And you would think, okay, they're going to be at 13 teams, so that means either a travel team is going to have to take their place or they're going to have to get another expansion team. However, that's not necessarily true because we got tipped off to some news that a particular team might wind up moving on from the American Association. The rumor currently is around Kane County. They may be leaving the league, going elsewhere to a different indie ball league. As of right now, there are some people. I have one source saying Frontier League. I have another source saying that the location is still to be determined. I have other people saying that they're not leaving. This is all generally what it is. Reached out to Frontier League people. They have no comment. As you expect, they're just looking forward to a strong conclusion to the 2026 season. They look forward to a bright 2027 season. However, regardless of what the official league comment is, we know they want to expand. We know they want 20, if not more than 20. Currently, they're at 18. That doesn't make for a great divisional setup when you have 9-9 and 4 divisions of 2 5s and 2 4s. It's a very awkward and ugly spot to be in. I wouldn't be stunned if the number winds up being 24. That's a very nice number. 4 divisions of 6, or you could do 3 divisions of 8, however you want to do that. Kane County does fit that mold, so I'm not saying it's going to happen, but another Chicago area team there that makes a very neat and tidy division if you were ever to do some kind of realignment, right? You have Kane County, that's in Geneva, Illinois. You have Joliet, who's Joliet, Illinois. Windy City and Crestwood. You would have Schaumburg. So you would have those 4 all nice and tightly grouped together. It's certainly a stronger possibility. You could probably put Gateway into that grouping as well. And then you really just have to find one other one to put there. And I mean, Evansville's a possibility. I'm sure Lake Erie would be a possibility. And all of a sudden, now you have a nice little 6-team setup that doesn't have too many travel problems with it. Or if you wind up just going, say, 1-1 for next year, you get up to a 20-team league. Hey, if you have Kane County, Schaumburg, Joliet, Windy City, you just need one more there, and you basically have a Chicago hub. You don't have to move all too many pieces around. It makes travel nice and easy. I'm sure everybody there is very happy about that. Not to mention recruiting for those teams. Hey, that's a pretty sweet gig. You're not really busting your balls traveling around as much. Everything about that lines up here. Now, I do wonder why Kane County would make that decision. I would assume it has something to do with the financial return currently. If playing in the American Association is not netting you a bigger financial return, or you believe that, and keep in mind they were an A-ball team before being cut, if you don't think the level of play is what's driving people there, then hey, why not explore going to a league that has more manageable costs, right? If you figure the math in that you really have to go out east once or twice, and you could do it pretty much in one swing if it's just one bad road trip a year where you got to go out to New York, New Jersey area, or you got to go up into Canada. It's not nearly as bad as being in a division that has Cleburne in it, having to make several trips down there, having to go up to Winnipeg several times, having to do a lot of other traveling on top of a more expensive roster, and a lot of other moving pieces. I wouldn't be stunned if that's part of it, because they've had plenty of success on the field. They've had back-to-back championships. They look like they're coming on strong now. We're going to talk about them in a little bit more depth in just a second when we get into the talking ball portion of this pod and move on from the news. But they've won 9 in a row now. They look poised to be really making a charge. Could they be putting some pressure on a Lake Country team that's slumping a little bit, on a Milwaukee team that hasn't been overwhelmingly head and shoulders away the best team in the league this year? Certainly possible. And I mean, if Kane has the same mindset that a team like, say, Quebec has, which at this point they're starting to get fairly comfortable on the field results, then you kind of say, all right, the first couple months or whatever, especially in a league like the Association, where realistically just don't be a bottom 2 team in your division. You'll make the postseason. If that's your mindset, especially after having won with a losing record last year, then you say, hey, we'll just start flicking the switch and really going for it in August, because that's really all you need is a strong 2 months, and boom, you're in the postseason. If you're not seeing the return on investment from the roster you have and the results on the field, then there's very little incentive to not go for an option that's going to reduce your travel bill, which is the big thing, and reduce your salary on players. I mean, it just makes more sense to go that route then, right? So I certainly think there's a lot of smoke to that. I'm not saying it's a done deal, that it's a lock, but I trust the people I've talked to that seem to think that it's a very strong possibility. And the general reaction I got from mentioning it seemed to be very strongly. So while it's not 100% certainty, I would certainly say it is something to watch out for. And I would expect probably by the end of October for us to really know what the plan is. Schedules are going to have to come out. People are going to have to start making arrangements. And I think that there is a very interesting world that exists where the association stays at 12 by essentially just switching out Blaine for King County. And the Frontier League gets another team in there that gets them to 19. They obviously will need at least one more for the next season. I don't believe that league wants to do more than 2 teams at a time. And I would be strongly in favor of just doing no more than 2 at a time. If for no other reason than it's just an easier introduction. You introduce, say, 4 teams in one shot. 6 teams would be wild and would never be feasible for a variety of reasons. I will say, doing those 2 at a time allows you to let them get their feet under you. Just kind of ease in here, and especially for next year, those 2 get you to your targeted 20. It lets the other markets develop, and I'm certain that they're looking at markets that currently are without a ballpark, that are currently in the process of getting that civic approval and getting their ducks in a row, so to speak. So if you get Kane, who's the other market you look at, right? If this turns out to be true, and it's a huge if, because like I said, it's still not definite, but there's a good amount of smoke. If it turns out to be true, who's the other one? Because they need to be ready to start play in 27. Which then presents another interesting question here. If you lose Kane for next year, if you're the association, who fills the gap in? Because obviously this Blaine ballpark is going to be years away from being done. I got to imagine construction in Minnesota is not a 12-month long cycle. Because when it starts to snow and ice up, it's awfully hard to work on job sites. Not impossible, but it's definitely not pleasurable, and it's certainly not easy. So, assuming best case scenario, shovels are in the ground sometime this week, because that's part of what was said on the one broadcast, which again, thanks to AA Baseball Fan for clipping that and putting that up online. Made it a lot easier, pretty much removed any doubt that it'd be anywhere other than Blaine. But, assuming shovels are in the ground in August of 26, we're looking best case scenario, beginning of 28, for the 28 season, which will not happen. I'd be stunned if we got a stadium built in 18 months. We're probably looking more like the 2029 season to really feel good and accurate about it. But let's be optimistic. Let's say 28 is a feasible goal. Cool. You still got to patch over for 1 year. Where is that team going to come from? Who's jumping ship? Who's moving around? What's the deal going to be? Or are we going to run with a travel team? Are we going to see the Red Pocket Mobiles jump from the Pioneer League to the American Association? Perhaps. I don't know. Who's to say? So when you factor all of that in, it becomes a real question of league makeup and league strategy. And yeah, I'm curious to see where it goes. I feel like I'm talking myself into a hole now. I've been going on for about 15 minutes on this, so I don't want to spend too much more time on it just to, fill time here. But yeah, overall, I'm very curious to see how this lineup works out. It's entirely possible Kane County's still there next year. It's entirely possible that Kane, still has a contract with the league that extends beyond the 26 season, beyond the 27 season. Maybe it's a situation where it's like, hey, we're going to see the Frontier League, and this is me just spitballing based off of a general feel of the wind at the moment. I could very well see, and this will be the last point on this topic, and then we'll move on to Talking Ball this week, just to prevent myself from vamping too long. But I see a very real scenario where we have an announcement this upcoming week. Blaine's going to join the American Association for the 2029 season, let's say. And that gives 2 years to fully build up an organization, put a lot of feelers in the water, what we want in the team. I'm a big fan of Minnesota Mighty Mullets. I think that's fun. I think that could be a fun thing. But let's just say you get the full 18-month block here to now start building up a team. You get to go ahead, really map everything out while the stadium's getting built. They don't have to rush construction to be ready for the 28th season. It allows for any delays in construction. And hey, if you're ready early, maybe you throw an event there in 28. Maybe you give Blaine the All-Star game in 28 because it'll be easy enough to audible out of should the stadium not be ready. And it'll still allow everyone from the league to come in and allow the community to come in and see what the product on the field, and they'll truly see the absolute best of the league, right? And that's how they're introduced to the league or reintroduced to the league. And that gets them excited for the product here. They see what it's all about. Cool, whatever. So they're lined up for 2029, which also gives the league another couple years here to say, hey, if we want to go ahead and expand a little bit more, get a couple more teams in here, we could go ahead and see who's on a similar timeline to Blaine and either phase them in along there, so maybe one in 28, one in 30, something like that, or perhaps it goes ahead and say, hey, we're all going in at the same time, we're all going in 29, and that's what the deal's going to be. Cool. So that's the first stage of that. And in the second stage of it, we see later on, maybe in, say, October, November time, we see the Frontier League, now soon to be the National Association, come out and say, hey, we are proud to announce we're going to be going and adding teams over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, some sort of Vision 2030 plan where they add a team in the Greater Montreal region, something we know they want to do. They add another team in Canada somewhere to essentially create a Canadian division, or at least a New England Canadian division. They announced Kane County to level it out, and they announced one other team to start to level it out, with the intention of getting to 24 teams by, say, 2030, 2034, something along those lines here. And just making sure that it's, 2 are going here, 2 are going there, and ultimately they say we'll have our 24 teams by 2030. It's going to be a mixture of established brands and new brands that are going to bring in experience and yada, 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 build up the league, build on the heritage and culture of the league, yeah. And at the same time, everybody's kind of sort of on the same page as to what's going to be happening through the BS partner league thing. I think there is a world in which you get that kind of announcement, that the American Association is going to be adding at least one team in Blaine with the vision of adding more in the coming years, and that the Frontier League, soon to be National Association, is going to be adding Kane County at the end of their contract with the American Association, as well as expanding into a few new markets over the course of the next 3 to 4 years. I think that kind of announcement is somewhat likely. I don't want to say definitely, because again, this is me just reading the wind. But if it were to happen, I wouldn't be shocked. I don't think you should be shocked. And I'd expect some version of that to be, if not a likely outcome, a likely desire of the decision makers in the league. So, something to watch out for. I'm sure when we get Ryan back on the show, whenever that might be, he will have thoughts to add on there as well. And I'm certain that once this goes up, I will have a plethora of DMs that will be telling me why I'm wrong, why I shouldn't have said what I said, or why I'm right. hopefully more of the last and less in the middle. But hey, who knows? In any case, let's talk some ball, because that's a fun change of pace, and that's what we all like to see around here. And we're going to stay in the American Association to talk a little bit of this ball. We mentioned Kane County on a 9-game heater not that long ago, and they are getting hot. They are starting to really look like the team they're meant to be. They're climbing up the board, and they're putting themselves in a very interesting spot here, right? We kind of assume that both Wisconsin teams are going to be in. Milwaukee seems to be doing a little bit better right now than Lake Country, who is slumping a little bit, mind you, which, looking at their run differential and the just sheer amount of runs they're scoring, it is wild, and I have to continue to remind myself that that is a ballpark that was designed with offense in mind, and the strategy and business sense of designing a ballpark with more offense versus a more well-rounded ballpark is always one that I will love, and always a conversation that, while wanting to have it, I equally understand that it's not the one to have by myself, so I won't get into it here, but Lake Country is falling back down to earth. Milwaukee seems to be gaining some steam, so assuming that some version of Milwaukee's truly going to be the only team to get to pick their opponent, I am curious to see where that will wind up going here. I wouldn't be stunned to see a Kane and Lake series here with Cleburne and Milwaukee being the other one, but again, presenting an interesting quandary if you are Milwaukee. Do you want to have to go to Cleburne? Nobody really wants to go to Cleburne. And frankly, I think if I'm Milwaukee, I'm really secretly hoping that Gary manages to get their act together, who has been starting to show life. Keep in mind, they won a couple series too. That's something to keep in mind here, including a series against the Dock Hounds. If they could go ahead and get in, that makes the decision very easy. You were obviously taking Gary if you're Milwaukee in that scenario. You let the big-time slugging team of go and play the defending champions and take whatever comes out of that, assuming you get past the Real Cats, of course. But, yeah, it's an interesting playoff setup right now for me there. That's really where I'm starting to turn my attention to as we start to really get into August here, right? We're wrapping up on the season very quickly. We got less than a month to play in this league. We got 20 games left, if that. So I'm eyeing up potential playoff matchups. And in the East, like I said, a hot Kane County team that we've touched on a little bit already is built for the postseason in mind. George Samus knows how to win in this league. He's proving that still. And I'm curious to see if they keep that up, and if they keep it up, how does that playoff series work, right? And furthermore, how do they actually stack up here? Because when you look through some of the teams they're beating, it is a mixed bag. I mean, you got some lesser caliber teams in here. You got some higher ones as well. Winnipeg's a team that's on a 12-game heater at the moment. They just finished beating up on Chicago. Kane got some Chicago wins in there as well. It's a real mixed bag going on here, but yeah, I'm curious to see how that winds up shaking up. Looking at the West quickly, though, Winnipeg on the 12-game heater is a very fascinating thing. They had some contract purchases slow them down. They were a very slow start to the year, which perhaps you chalk up to being on the road a little bit. Perhaps you chalk up to home games still being 40 degrees Fahrenheit, so not exactly a fun time there, but they really found their stride as of late. And, of course, there's always going to be people that point out to go, well, who have they played in this 12-game stretch? And that's a fair point. And sure, they're going to say, well, if they didn't win 12 in a row, they still wouldn't have a great record here. But I'm always inclined to say, sure, that's a valid point. They're hot right now. They're taking advantage of it. But other teams have gotten hot. We've seen plenty of 8+ game win streaks in the association this year, which is its own conversation of itself to see how streaky these things are this year. But regardless of all of that, to the main point, they still won 12% of their games in a row. They still are by far the hottest team in indie ball at the moment, and they still are just dialed up to 100 here, and they're showing up when they need to show up. And it doesn't really matter who they're beating because everybody's playing everybody, right? Chicago had to play however many games against other people. That's still the same Chicago team. Winnipeg's still beating them. Same thing for anyone else that they're playing there. whether that's Lake Country or Sioux Falls. They still have to beat these teams here. So they're really rocketing up there, and they've managed to catapult themselves into second place in that division with this 12-game winning streak. So they're finding the time to get hot, and they're doing it exactly right here, especially with the Kansas City team that is slumping a little bit, and now objects in the rear view are closer than they appear. And I can't tell if this is Kansas City trying to, manage things a little bit here, right? Like, they built out such a lead. They're essentially a lock for the postseason at this point. But you don't want to run out of gas prior to that. But it also is hard to turn the engine back on, right? Platitudes, sure, but it is a grain of truth that exists there. So I'm interested to see how that winds up shaking up here. I do think the Winnipeg streak in the end shows that they are capable of great things, but I don't know if they're still a true top-tier contender, right? Because you do have to look at the whole body of work here. And you got to make the decision of, is the last 2 weeks who they are, or is it the past 8 weeks prior to that who they are? And I'm more inclined to believe the 8-week sample size than the 2-week. That being said, I don't think the West is a particularly strong division this year, whereas in the East you can kind of point things out. We talked about it a little bit over the past couple of weeks, how the league's kind of separated into tiers where you have your 4 that are really like, yeah, these are contenders, and then you have your 4 that are kind of in the middle where you're not sure what to make of, and then your other 4 that were just not doing good. That's been flipped on its head here with this Winnipeg streak, with King County finding some life here. And you look at things now, and really you're almost separating them in halves, right? The upper half of each division feels stronger, but at least in the East, the top 3, you can all sell an argument on being a title contender. Milwaukee, a really strong pitching team, a pitching team that is, if not the best in the league, second best in the league, and their offense is able to do what needs to be done when they need to do it, right? Lake Country, you have a truly dynamic offense, and not all of that is ballpark here. Josh Mears hits wherever he goes. There's plenty of other pieces on that team that can just take over a game. And in the past, I've been a very big advocate for batting travels. Pitching having a bad day will end you. And it's way too finicky, and pitchers get purchased a lot more. So building around pitching is really a house of cards situation, because pitching's thin everywhere. Batting is less so. Why pitching always has the upper hand, there's a reason why batting, 280 is a good thing when you're only getting a hit 28% of the time. Or having made that argument before, I could see a world where, Lake Country just kind of outslugs other teams and they out-hit their problems and they wind up playing for a championship, right? That's a viable path. And even King County, right? They've won back-to-back championships. They have a veteran team still. They have a veteran manager, probably the most experienced one of the bunch there, even though, Anthony Barone's certainly seen a lot of time here and has won a title too. George Samus is still by far the most highly regarded among them all. So each one of them, you can make a very easy case for why they would be in a final. In the West, it's less so. Like Kansas City, between the managerial staff, the overall roster here, the body of work thus far, probably the most well-rounded team in the league, and every team going through ups and downs, so you don't really worry about a bad, not even bad, but just like a slower 10-day stretch. You don't worry about that as much. After that, it becomes a lot more difficult, right? Winnipeg, you say they're hot, they're finding their grooves, they're taking advantage of rosters, or they're taking advantage of their schedule, and they're building the confidence they need to be the team that they were meant to be. You can make that argument. You could say that the upper-level talent in Fargo is enough to really get the job done, although the pitching is not good. Sioux Falls, you could say that they have managed to outrun their problems thus far, so is it really a problem if it's not holding them back, even though despite having a winning record, they are minus 30 in the run differential? But yeah, outside of those handful of teams, what is there really to look at out west? The answer is not really a whole hell of a lot. So why not Winnipeg is really the question to be asked. So it's something curious to see. We'll see how it winds up panning itself out. But yeah, we got to keep moving. I don't want to bore people too much here. It is just me here, and we're already at a half hour in. So quickly looking at the other leagues, because there are some interesting notes from there as well this week here. I'm sure we'll backtrack over a lot of this stuff next week. But Modesto, 21 to start second half. Also an 11-game heater. They're right up there with Winnipeg for hottest teams here. Arguably, Modesto's the hottest team because they're 20 of their last 21, and they are like a roadster. They are just roaring through everybody else here. People know my Pioneer League stance, so we won't spend all too much time here. Missoula also fighting back is interesting here. This is the one team I really do have a lot of strong thoughts on, which is to say, I wonder if the slow first half is a reversal from past years, right? Where we saw strong regular seasons from Missoula, and then it kind of peter out in the postseason. I do wonder if having to fight for a playoff spot, not having it already locked up by the time July came around, is now going to motivate them or get them going still, right? If that engine starts turning a month or two later, does it keep going for a month or two longer? And that's the curious thing for me. Like right now, it's a really tough thing for me to see, right? Because Billings is kind of playing the traditional Missoula role, right? That Montana team is doing what the other Montana team normally does, in that they had a very good first half, and they kind of slowed down, took the foot off the accelerator a little bit by design or otherwise. I don't know. I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, but they certainly are. They're certainly easing off a little bit here, and that's concerning to me. Just because we see Long Beach, the other playoff team here, continuing to keep it up, continuing to keep things going. You have Modesto being flaming hot here. And then with that last playoff spot here really still up for grabs, as it seems like Modesto's pretty safely going to secure that spot here. And with Long Beach potentially opening up a wild card, Missoula having to fight for this makes you start to think, like, hey, is this the year they get it over? Like, yeah, there's some roster turnover, no doubt about that. And they'd have to go through a really well-rounded Long Beach team. I think they're probably the most well-rounded in the league here. Or an upstart Billings team that's possibly playing for their franchise's future. Or one of the hottest teams in baseball, Modesto. It's not going to be an easy pathway no matter what for them. But they are finding their stride when it matters. And obviously there's still work to be done here. I believe they're tied for the last spot as of now. But curious all the way around to see how this is going to wind up working itself out there. Also looking at Oakland, kind of treading water a little bit. They've won a few games here. They're getting back to around 500 or so, but very firmly middle of the pack here. And it feels like that ownership group taking on an extra team is kind of really show up here in Oakland. And I am curious to see how things work out. Off the field, they seem to still be doing fine. They'll still be drawing. There seems to be a high enough level of community engagement still going on fine there. But on the field, it seems to be the tide turning a little bit. And then only other thing of note from the Pioneer League, from my perspective here, is that we have Red Pocket looking like a true travel team again. 1-19, essentially Bizarro Modesto, if you would. So something to watch out for. We'll see how this goes. Other quick little hop here just to the Atlantic League before we'll wrap with the Frontier. Atlantic League here. The York Pride are doing a great job still. They're really taking control. They seem to be locking up a playoff spot here. Just beating up on the rest of the league at the moment here. They're far and away on top of their division. Gastonia's getting hot, but the South Division as a whole is still very crappy, if I'm being entirely honest here. Lexington seems to be in control of a playoff spot as of right now, but Gastonia close by, and then everybody else is just kind of falling all over themselves at the moment here. Southern Maryland doesn't have much to play for, so again, feels like they put it in park. Could be some regression too there, who's to say. Charleston still has the same issues they've been plagued by all year. That's still holding true now. And that leaves a High Point team that's extremely underperforming and just really disappointing based off of what they've done by and large in their whole franchise's history. So Atlantic as a whole in the South, not doing great. In the North, you have a Lancaster team, which I have the sense that this time next week, Ryan's going to be trying to sell me on being a legitimate team, despite me not seeing this at all. Truly a neutral team. They feel like a 500 club. They play like a 500 club. I'm not really moved by them. Staten Island continuing to be an absolute joke of an organization. 16 wins on the season, though. They just took some games from Long Island as well. And that kind of brings me to the greater point here, as Hagerstown also put it in park at the moment, too, I might add. Which, that's a different conversation, too. Is it Hagerstown putting in park, or is it second half Minikasi? Who's to say? Duke it out in the replies. But to the point of, is Long Island overrated? And that's just a quick conversation I want to have. It won't take more than 2 minutes on it, but are the Ducks overrated? Because on a certain level, you would think, no, they're a good overall team. They still have a pretty solid record. But they're not, like, by and far and away blowing everybody else out, right? Like, you look at the runs scored to runs given up. And the North Division's way out of whack, mainly because you have a near minus 1,000 on the season run differential. And I'm being genuinely serious with that. If you look at Staten Island, they're at about minus, I want to say it's 882 on the season. Less bad in the second half, but still not good. And from what remains, the roughly 30 or so games left, they just have to lose each of them by an average of 3.5 runs a game, right? So assuming they win about 4 or 5 more games, right? So that'll be a positive run differential. It really just takes 2 or 3 ugly losses and then like 20 or so normal losses, and that'll be that. Like at this point, it's almost a given they will not hit 30 wins. It's a real crapshoot if they're going to get to 25 or even 20 wins. So fully expect them to be around the minus 1,000 mark, which is just a wild thing to be the minus millennial mark. Truly crazy there. So that throws everything out of whack. But when you look at the second half in particular, it's not eye-popping. And I understand it to a degree, right? Long Island's been hit with a lot of contract transfers. They've been hit with a lot of just moving pieces and things shifting on them. And it's been an up and down year from general community reception, media perception, and results. But the way they're talked about, especially by Atlantic League loyalists and supporters, makes them out to be a much bigger threat than they are. And they're still probably the second best team in the second half. Don't get me wrong. I'm not sold on anything in the South, and Lancaster being the third place team currently here with Hagerstown fumbling and Staten Island just barely existing. They kind of win it by default. But I'm just saying, when I look at the overall body of work, I'm not really moved by it. And if anything, I think the York Pride are currently the team to beat for the crown here. Because really, Southern Maryland is not showing me much. And I think it's going to be not ugly baseball per se, but 2 really slightly above average teams playing for a shot at a title in the South. And I think in the North, it really remains to be seen what we're going to get from Hagerstown in the postseason. This is the first time they've gotten to the postseason in their franchise history. Mark's an up and down kind of manager, so we've never seen him finish a year overly strong. There's been moments, but never a consistent thing in the second half. If that holds true, you gotta like York as the defending champion to, flex their muscles, right? And we could see another year of back-to-back champions here. I mean, genuinely, you look across the board here. We know the Frontier League is going to be Quebec's league until proven otherwise. Kane County has a viable path forward in the association. And you have the Revs that are doing good and just far away and don't really have much competition, per se, to stop them at the moment if Long Island proves to be fraudulent. So a repeat year is very much very much in play. And I'm just curious to hear general community thoughts on Long Island here. Maybe I'm tweaking on it. Maybe I'm just, being ignorant to the team they had. And, they definitely have some standout performers, individual performers here. And perhaps I'm buying too much into losing games to Staten Island. But I don't know. Something about them I can't put my finger on. I don't know if they're a legit team or not. But finishing strong with the Frontier League this week. We'll try to keep this week under an hour because I know it's a little tedious to listen to one person for an hour. But Frontier League, we got some interesting points here. I want to shout out the Florence 11-game winning streak here, which coattails into the Central Division is so good, man. Washington, 51 wins. They're going to almost certainly clinch a winning record at some point this week. They may be at 52 now. I do not have the Friday results in front of me, so they could very well be at 52, and by the time the weekend comes, boom, clinch a winning record. But they're doing great. Evansville and Florence both at 45 wins. Lake Erie's just not it this year. It's been a down year for them, certainly, but the rest of that Central Division is so good. And I really, once I get the computer set up all fixed here, I really want to start looking into these teams and doing videos on some of these teams that we always say we need to talk about and never get to because, that's just the way the flow of the conversation goes. But genuinely, I'm so impressed with the turnaround on both Florence and Evansville and the continued domination of Washington, right? They've had some years in the past where we're like, okay, it's a rebuilding year for Washington, I guess. But that's still a Wild Things team that's only a year or so removed from battling it out with Quebec. Now, Quebec handled that in the not in the minimum, but they handled in 4, so they did not take the max on them, which is something that other teams from, ironically, was now the current Central Division have managed to drag them out to. But regardless, it's a really solid Washington team here, and the more I'm looking at that, the more looking at the rosters that they've constructed and the schedule that they've played and the competition that they face regularly, I'm starting to believe a little bit that they're going to be a serious problem for Quebec, right? In the East this year, whatever happens in I'll just call it the Tri-State Division because the 4 teams, 3 of them are all in the greater New Jersey area, Sussex, New Jersey, and then Rockland, New York, which is quite literally 15 minutes from the border with New Jersey, so they may as well all be Jersey teams. And then there's down east down there, who, man, if they had relief pitching, would have been a really big problem. But there's a vision there, there's a path there, and it is what it is. I have confidence in what they're building. But regardless of that fact, that division as a whole is kind of falling all over itself, and we'll talk about them a little bit more in advance here. Ottawa's being criminally underrated and disrespected by a lot of people this year. They are a very strong team, and if they weren't in the same division as Quebec, we'd be treating them a lot more seriously. But, every Frontier League conversation has to revolve around Quebec because they've been so dominant in this league here. So when you're in that shadow, and there's been several opportunities where you could have overtook them, you had them on the ropes, and they bounced back, they being Quebec, until it's done, it's not done, right? And that's why we go back to the original point here, talking about Washington playing Quebec in a final, and why we always go, why are you talking Quebec? Why are you talking Quebec? They keep winning. Every year they find a way to win. And so it becomes, how do you beat them? And Washington is just such an overall well-developed team. They have a solid 1 through 9 lineup. They have the starting pitching. They have the relief pitching. They have all the elements here, and they're beating good teams. They're beating teams that are, quite frankly, comparable to a 48-win Quebec team as it stands today. They're beating 45-win teams. They're beating teams that are good at hitting. They're beating teams that are good at pitching. They're proving they can win in different ways here, right? And to a degree, the naysayers, including myself to some degree, will say, well, Washington's always been a good regular season team. They've always found a way to win regular season games. They put up gaudy numbers there. We've seen them in a, 96-game season put up close to 60 wins before, and look like that dominating force, only to get bounced by Lake Erie in round 1, fail against Quebec in the past, fail against a proven playoff performer in, say, Schaumburg. It feels different this time, though. And I really need to look more deeply into that division because it's very impressive with what they're doing. And to that extent, I also want to make sure I give the proper flowers to Florence and Evansville. Evansville was an organization that the last couple of years really was wandering the desert, right? We were really starting to wonder, like, what's Andy cooking here? We understand there's rebuild years here, but the young guys don't look like they're coming around. And then guys like Giacomo wound up going to Southern Maryland, going elsewhere, right? And so the positive pieces were starting to get stripped away a little bit. And then he just came up with a real all-time year. And in a year that such stiff competition in its division would be a first-place team. And to that same point, Florence was a team that was really teetering on the edge. They were a team that we weren't sure was going to be a wild-card team. They were going to have to fight off a Windy City or a Schaumburg to get it. They have removed all doubt. And the job Toby Hall has done really in the full calendar year as a manager in this league has been phenomenal. He got dealt a very difficult situation in Windy City last year and did better than I think anyone could have expected. And then in turn went to Florence and has rebuilt a team that really hasn't seen much success in quite some time and put together a real stud-filled roster. A lot of those guys were already there, I will admit, but he filled in the gaps and he found the way to put the team in a successful position. And it's far more successful than I think anyone would expect here. And yeah, the offensive numbers are inflated a bit, no doubt. This comes with playing in Florence. But just the overall body has been truly tremendous. And it's going to be such a fascinating playoff race. Because one of these two teams is going to get to go and play Schaumburg. It seems pretty confident that Schaumburg is going to be the playoff team over there. And we're going to see two really, really solid playoff matchups in the West. Whether that is Washington-Florence or Washington-Evansville or Schaumburg and Florence and Schaumburg and Evansville, whatever the combination is, it's truly going to be great because we're going to see arguably the three best teams in the league, but certainly three of the top four in the league battle it out against each other and a proven playoff performer in Schaumburg, I believe the last non-Quebec champion in the league, Schaumburg. And they're all going to be playing for really a shot at taking down the dynasty of the Frontier League in the last year of the Frontier League. It's sticking around, but with a new name. New year, new name deal. Assuming we're still doing National Association. It's going to be a really fun fight to the finish in the West. Looking at the East, again, a real cat fight between New York and New Jersey right now. New York's kind of trending down. New Jersey's trending up. I'm going to be there for the series against the Miners this weekend. So we'll be there for the doubleheader on Saturday. So when you're listening to this, I'll probably be up there seeing the scene, seeing what's going on there. Big weekend for them. Boulders really need to start stringing some wins together. That division lead's really starting to whittle down. And New Jersey's on the rise, right? The last month or so, they've been going up. And frankly, neither team looks overly strong. Credit to Bobby Jones for rebuilding that Jersey team that has not looked great as of recent. Credit to TJ for really holding off the tide of various teams for all this season. And again, making New York a truly perennial playoff team here. But rubber's hitting the road. Someone's going to have to blink here fairly soon. Now, this race admittedly does lose a little bit of stakes here. It seems pretty clear-cut that it's going to be Quebec in the one spot. Whoever winds up winning this division, the two, they'll wind up playing Ottawa, and then the other team's going to get Quebec. So there's no real easy meals here. However, there is one interesting scenario here, and without being able to look up the remaining schedule, the remaining 20 or so games, is who has more games against Sussex left. Because this weekend, as I mentioned, the Boulders are playing the Miners at home. Had a rain out today on Friday. Going to play a doubleheader tomorrow on Saturday. Meaning today on Saturday when you're listening to this, assuming you listen on release day. It could be a very bad weekend for New York. There's a world in which they lose both halves of this doubleheader, manage to claw one back tomorrow, or don't even. And then all of a sudden, the world's flipped on its head. Sussex begins to ascend in the wild card, although they had a bad series against the Yawls not that long ago. But Sussex starts getting closer in that wild card. You start getting closer to falling out of it. And depending on how many games you got against them left, it could go south. Now, I don't know how many they got left. I don't know how many New Jersey got left against them. And I don't know if Brockton's going to make themselves a player in this. Because keep in mind, Brockton's record is not too dissimilar from Sussex County's. However, it's just something to keep in mind that last wild card isn't locked up, even if it is leaning heavily towards the second place of the supposed East Division. Something to keep in mind, something to watch for. Looking the other way, Quebec's still doing good. They slumped down a little bit here, but again, we do this routine every year. I distinctly remember doing it every year, where we go, oh, well, let's go back. Is this the year with Quebec? They don't look totally strong. If they start a year slow, or they lull out in the middle of it, whatever it might be. We don't really care what Quebec does in the regular season. We care about what they do come September, because that is Quebec season. Ottawa, again, 43-win team. Like, quietly, the 5th best team in the league. Top 5 of 18. Ottawa truly is one of the most disrespected franchises in indie ball. They have a really solid organization off the field. They have a quality staff. They return a lot of guys. They're pretty well proven. And they always give Quebec a run for their money, even if it always ends the same way. And I don't know why, right? I kind of feel a little bit different about the Titans this year, right? Like, maybe it's because I don't feel like Quebec has been as overwhelming. Perhaps I've been a little too checked out in the Frontier League. And I know I always say, and I've said a couple times already today, it's Quebec's league until proven otherwise. But I just remember so many close calls the Titans have given them that I genuinely believe that this could be the year. Now, there's plenty of things to point into it, and we want to dig into stats, and at some point we will. And again, who knows? Maybe I'll do a separate video on the YouTube channel just dedicated to that hypothetical postseason matchup. But talking in the abstract a bit, because I'm more of the abstract guy on the pod than the numbers guy, I always have been. However, I figure this is really the last run with the Ottawa core, right? You start looking at the rosters, there's a lot of guys that are going to be clicking over into a new roster classification status here. And assuming we're not changing anything with the roster rules anytime soon, this is going to be the last hurrah for at least a couple of these guys. Plus, there's some long mainstays here that are getting older, and I don't know how many years they got left in the tank. Just playing and being productive members of the team. And so when you think of it like that, you think of it through that lens, maybe this year is different for that reason here. And that's not to say Quebec doesn't have guys like that. I'm just saying, I'd watch it. Maybe it's this year. Maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there, but maybe it's this year. So that's all 4 leagues. We've gone on for nearly an hour. We're going to wrap it up here. If you stuck around this long, I appreciate you sticking around for the first solo pod in about a year, actually, so not too bad. Hopefully y'all enjoyed it. You can follow the pod, IndieBall Pod, on Twitter, IndieBall Report, everywhere else. We've been lacking on the socials. Hopefully we'll get back to, doing what we need to do on those sooner than later. So you can follow there. You can find the pod wherever you find podcasts. Apple, Amazon, Spotify, TuneIn, or the website itself. So, alright, we're gonna wrap it up here because I gotta edit this thing now and get it up, and then get up to New York tomorrow for the doubleheader. We'll talk to you soon, but until then, don't forget to play ball.